This is Wheel Bearings. I'm Dan Roth from Forbes.
I'm Sam Abu-Al-Samad from Navigant Research.
And I'm Rebecca Linland from Rebecca Drives.
Back from NAMM. Did you see anything cool at NAMM? And all the like music people?
You know, tragically, I really never left the retail store. It's such a zoo there that I did get to see a lot of cool people, but mostly because they were buying T-shirts from my brother.
Okay. All right. Anybody notable?
Probably not. I mean, one of my favorite people is this guy Kenny who's actually endorsed as a what do they call it? The impersonator, but in a positive way, tribute of for Elton John.
Oh, that's cool.
And Elton John actually endorses him as somebody that he supports doing his music. And Kenny is just a riot, and he's so much fun. And he walks around in full Elton gear all 5 days, and it's just a blast. So he always makes sure to come into the store and say hi to us and stuff. And he's just a great guy and does an incredible show. So he's always fun to see. And they were probably people that I didn't know that, you know, I should have recognized. But the fun part about now, it's a lot of fun things, but is that the music industry, the people there are just so consistently nice and fun and just happy to be there and enjoy the show. And it's just such a great experience. That
sounds so different from a car show.
It does. Well, and I don't want to get us too off track, but believe me, that's what I was thinking of.
Really?
It's true because, you know, so NAMM is the National Association of Music Merchants. And it's a combination of teachers. There's all of the suppliers there. So Fender is there, Gibson guitars, PV amps. Like it just goes on and on and on. And actually last year, Nissan was there because they had recently put in a Fender stereo in the Tundra. So there is overlap, actually.
I didn't realize Nissan had a Fender. I know Volkswagen did for a while. That's interesting.
Yes. Huh? Yeah. So
you mean the Titan?
And the Titan, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
A Nissan Titan, yes. So yeah, it was, you know, so there is some low overlap, but it shows to me, NAMM shows that what an industry event can still be, you know, sort of like CES, right? It's that, you know, it's just, there's a level of exclusivity. There's, you know, you're seeing new cool things, you're seeing exciting things, and people really want to be there.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
Well, I think that that industry has more tentacles than the car industry, and it's a little easier for them to iterate. You know,
yeah, no, for sure. I mean, absolutely.
But that's cool. I'm glad it was a good time. So now we're all back and we're driving stuff. So let's get to that. Sam, I was actually interested in your impressions of the Lexus GX because didn't we just tear that thing up a couple of episodes ago?
No, that was the LX, I think, right?
Oh, it was the LX.
I had the LX.
Oh yeah, sorry. It was the LX that I had. I mistyped this in the rundown here. It was the same one that you had.
Okay,
the very same one. You found Rebecca's initials carved under the dashboard.
Yeah, strangely enough, I was wondering what that RB was or that RL was there for. No, yeah. So it was the same. You know, in fact, you know, the 2-row version. You know, and the timing actually was fortuitous because it was right before a couple of days before I left on a trip, and we got like 8 inches of snow, and then it got warm that day, you know, and so it all kind of got melted and slushy, and then it got really cold the next day, and so it froze all this stuff. So maneuvering around in a regular car, you know, would have been a little more challenging, you know, because this is basically a luxury. Toyota Land Cruiser. It was, you know, it's actually really well sorted out for, you know, off-road driving, you know, aside from not having all-terrain tires. You know, if you actually wanted to use this thing off-road, I would definitely recommend getting some proper tires for it. You know, the all-season tires were fine for what I needed, you know, and, you know, getting around my neighborhood and other areas around these big chunks of ice, you know, that had sort half melted and then flash frozen. You know, it definitely made it easier. That said, you know, this is a big hulking SUV. You know, it's a traditional body on frame SUV. You know, for all the good and bad that brings along. You know, it's heavy, it's large. but it's capable for what it's designed for, and it's also a gas hog. Over the course of like 4 days, I think I drove it and then dropped it off at the airport. It averaged about 10.5 miles per gallon. So I mean,
that's a shoe size,
and that included some highway driving to get to the airport. Yeah, exactly.
So was it as underwhelming though as Rebecca found it, with just or like puzzling? Like, why does somebody buy this with this?
It kind of was. Because like I said, it's got, a lot of the same characteristics as a Land Cruiser, but it's more luxurious, but you're getting you're compromising those Land Cruiser characteristics by putting all season tires on it instead of proper off-road tires on it, like you might have on a Land Cruiser, because almost nobody that's going to buy the Lexus is actually going to use it for what a Land Cruiser is intended for. So it is kind of puzzling as to why it exists. But there's a few thousand people a year that seem to like it. And for them, that's great. I would have no use. I mean, if I wanted a luxury SUV, I would be much more inclined, I think, to go for something like a Range Rover, like a real luxury SUV with real off-road chops. I would be much more inclined to go for something like the Range Rover, or, a year or so from now, for something like the Rivian R1S, which I think is really targeting that. And that's going to be an EV, for what this is, as we said last time, it's kind of old and it feels it. It has, the Lexus N-Form infotainment system, which is, not a great UI. It doesn't have a touchpad like the newer Lexuses. It still has the old mini joystick, /mouse controller, which is okay, but it's just not a great experience driving this thing.
Yeah, my friend Tom, as I mentioned before, has gotten 2 of these, and he loves it, but he loves it for very specific reasons. And the most important thing in his mind is that his aging golden retriever Matilda, her cage, she can lay down comfortably in the back. That is his number one priority.
Go ahead.
Well, because I also think that he's not a Toyota guy. He'd rather have a Lexus. So he's very successful. He's owned Lambos and Bentleys. He's got an i8 right now, along with a Alpha Giulia, and he doesn't want to have a Toyota. He wants a Lexus. And hashtag okay boomer.
Yeah. Well, that use case of, having enough cargo space in the back, it's not like there's not other SUVs that have a big cargo area in the back. It's legit. But, if you're talking about, having an old dog, a senior dog, that wants to be able to lay down and spread out, it's also a very high lift over. So, I mean, how's the dog, do you have a ramp in there for the dog to walk up the ramp? You lift the dog up?
I think he picks her up and puts it in. Yeah. I'm just telling you. It's okay. A real world.
You can get little dog ramps. Like that.
I know. I know.
I mean, for sure.
And if you have a big dog, that's actually very useful. Yeah. I mean, one of my neighbors down the street, they've got an older Ford Explorer, and they've got a 10-month-old Bernese Mountain Dog.
And, such a big dog.
He's already over 100 pounds. Yeah. And he's my Corgi's best friend.
I was going to say, that's Daisy's playmate, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, obviously they can't lift him up to get him into the Explorer, right. And he's not quite, he's not able to jump up into the back of the Explorer on his own. So they've got a ramp, so he can get up into the back, which is great. I mean, and that's perfectly legit. But, I guess, it depends. It sounds like your friend has a particular use case where he wants to have an SUV, that he can take the dog in. So that's perfectly legit. I mean, that's why we have all kinds of different vehicles.
Well, but there's no van options, like in terms of a luxury van. You can't get a Lexus version of the Sienna.
Well, no, because the R Class went away.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, the R Class sort of fit that. And I guess, given the competitive set, right? I personally would probably have more faith in the Lexus, even though it's old stuff, than an Escalade. The Escalade's going to be nice for a couple of years, and I'm a little on the fence about how well General Motors luxury holds up. The powertrain I'm sure would be fine, but just the Lexus stuff, while it's a little disappointing in some respects, some of the materials are kind of not as good as you'll find in other brands and stuff. It tends to be really reliable and durable, and that's one of the things that sort of bites some of the other luxury brands is they just don't age well. So when you sell a vehicle that's already old, it's sort of like pre-aged,
Yeah. I'll be curious, the next time your friend Rebecca, replaces the LX, what he chooses, whether he continues with, another Lexus or, maybe looks at something like the BMW X7 or something like the Rivian.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he's having so much fun with his i8 that I do see him potentially getting like an X7. I mean, he's single, but he's got this dog and that's his priority. And so, and he does, in fairness too, he does.
And that's perfectly legit
like
to have the dog be your priority.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, it's been done. I think something about racing and precipitation.
Well, I mean, he does, and he does, like at Pebble Beach, he drove down from Seattle to Monterey, and then there was 5 or 6 of us that would get in and out of this thing constantly. So, and then they drove back. And so, he does enjoy driving it. And I mean, as you said, the fuel economy, I think I got right around 10 to 11 in town as well. I mean, the one that I had was rated 12, 16, and then combined 14. But, yeah, I mean, I finally put my review up on Rebecca Drives, and it's a beast. It's a beast to park. Yeah. It's a beast to turn around. It's big but it's just a beast.
That, so that fuel economy is abysmal, especially from the brand that makes, the Prius. But
yeah,
I think this is such a sort of niche seller in the US, especially, it's because it's based on the Prado that is, right. I think it's a lot more popular in other versions, especially Toyota versions in other parts of the world where it makes more sense. So here it's kind of just like, okay, we compete with Range Rover. Here's our sort of half-hearted attempt,
Yeah, they probably can. Well, they can probably make this for relatively short money, and it's all profit.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the tooling would have been paid off long ago. And I'll be curious to see what Lexus does next in this class. Because of some of the new competition that's out there. And I would assume that at some point in the not too distant future, there will be a next generation of this platform. That at that point may well get a hybrid option. Because I think there's a new version of the Tundra and some of the other trucks that's coming out either later this year or next year. That will probably have a hybrid variant available. And, Lexus is, or Toyota and Lexus, are really going all in on having hybrids available in pretty much everything they build.
Well, because hybrids are getting so much better because they're so much more transparent now than they were. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's different than like something like the Prius where it's, there was a lot of sacrifices, especially on the early Prius. And
yeah, you're right. I mean, now it's completely normal.
Yeah.
Right. Took a long time.
Well,
but
I think too, like, I would love to see a hybrid Tundra because of Toyota's experience with hybrid. The thing that I recall is the Prius hybrid hardware didn't scale as well. And that's what, so GM came out with hybrid trucks back in the day. And they had the hybrid Escalade and stuff.
Was it like 10 years ago?
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
More than that?
2008.
Yeah.
Right?
But yeah. They had the hybrid SUVs where it was more of a challenge for Toyota to match that because their system didn't scale up to truck use as well or as gracefully. So it'll be great to see what they do with it because they have so much other experience with it now with their fleet. But the next LX is just going to be like one big grill.
Yeah.
And it's funny you mentioned the X7 because that thing took so much crap when it debuted, and it just looks fantastic on the road. I see them around the Boston area, and they just look fantastic. They look really good.
They do. It's a handsome vehicle.
Yeah.
It really is.
So, all right. So you didn't like the LX, Sam?
It's not a vehicle for me.
Not for you. Okay, but for its target market, it has there's some sense there.
Yeah, I mean, for wealthy single guys with an older golden retriever, wants to lie in the back, it's a perfect SUV.
So then, who is the 2020 Lincoln Aviator Grand Touring for? Then is that for like older golfing couples or?
No, definitely. I don't. Not for couples. More for somebody who wants luxury and wants 3-row capability, and also wants performance and electrification and all that stuff all in one fancy package. Rebecca and I both drove the Aviator last summer at the media launch out in California.
I thought it was excellent.
It was, and it still is. Although the example that I had here, I did have a few issues with it. And it turns out that it seems to mostly have been related to the battery, but not the big lithium-ion battery under the floor, but rather to the old-fashioned 12-volt lead acid battery under the hood.
Do tell. What happened?
Yeah, so at one point, midway through the week I had it for, all of a sudden the driver's side door wouldn't open from the outside. I unlocked it and grabbed the handle, and the door handles on the Aviator they have electronic switches on the inside, so you grab the door handle and it triggers the switch and unlatches the door. And I could not get the driver's side door to open. I actually had to climb in from the passenger side and reach across to open it. Yes, it was cold.
I mean, it's not an excuse, but I'm just trying to picture
this.
I mean, it wasn't a polar vortex cold, but it was in the 20s.
Doesn't that
that's not cold?
So that makes the argument.
I'm sorry.
That makes the argument for having a linkage or something.
Oh, totally.
Well, on the other hand,
except that wasn't the end of the issues. The very last day, the day it was supposed to be picked up, I was moving a couple of things around in my driveway, and I moved the Aviator, so it was in position so they could easily pull it out of the driveway and take it away and replace it with something else. And I moved it, and then I came back out, an hour later, when they were on their way to pick it up, and I was going to get something out of it that I had left in there, get my USB cable out of it, and I could not get any doors open or anything to respond. I mean, it would, and so I finally pulled when you have these modern vehicles with keyless entry systems with a fob, there's always a physical key still embedded in there for emergencies.
Right.
And in the case of the Aviator, because of the way the door handles are done, where there's no keyhole there, the keyhole is actually embedded just underneath the mirror on the driver's side. And there's a little flap there that is not very visible, but if you just stick the key through it, you can unlatch it manually, unlock the door manually, and it actually does release the door, which actually could have been useful earlier in the week. But at this point, I tried to get it started. I tried to start the car, and it wouldn't crank. I mean, it was completely dead. And when they came to get it, they actually got it jump started. I was trying to figure out how to jump start this thing because I didn't want to mess anything up because it is a plug-in hybrid. So you've got these two parallel electrical systems. You've got the high voltage system and the 12 volt, and there was no owner's manual in the car. So I didn't want to do anything.
The owner's manual is in the infotainment now. So they don't print it.
No, actually, it's because these press vehicles, as we've talked about before, very often are pre-production models.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And so they're shipped from the factory, and they don't necessarily have everything with them that they're supposed to, like the owner's manual. And so I didn't have an owner's manual, so I didn't want to risk jump starting it and destroying it. So I just left it until they got there. But it was completely dead. And after they picked it up, they jump started it, took it back. An engineer checked it out back at Ford, and turns out it was a defective 12 volt battery. So, even on these modern high-tech vehicles, you can still get tripped up by something as basic as a classic lead acid battery. But aside from that, actually driving it was actually, it was still a great experience. This thing, is really quiet. For something that weighs almost 3 tons, it's surprisingly, nimble. It handles quite well, and really nice interiors. We've talked about before with modern Lincolns. Everything worked. Everything inside, when the 12-volt battery was worked great. I love, unlike you, Dan, I do like the 30-way adjustable seats, and I am able to get comfortable in them. And I love the massaging system they have in there, which is great when you're going for a drive. I think for me, if you're looking for a 3-row luxury SUV, I think that, I personally think this is a great choice. It is a plug-in hybrid, and I took it for a drive, fully charged it up, and the temperatures were in the mid 20s when I took it for a drive. I wanted to see how far I could actually go just on electricity without getting the engine turned on. And it's got multiple drive modes, one of which is, the pure EV mode. There's also a preserve EV mode where you can, when you put it in that mode, it actually runs the engine, and it'll actually charge up the battery, so that if you're going somewhere where when you get close to your destination, you want to have it be able to go into EV mode, it'll actually charge the battery up for you while you're driving. But in just straight up EV mode, it's only got about 100 horsepower from the electric motor, but it's got, a couple of 100 foot-pounds of torque, and it's not going to be a speed demon in that case, but it's got enough. It's enough that, in city driving, you can accelerate at a reasonable pace without the engine coming on. And I got about 15 miles out of it. It's officially rated at 21 miles. But again, it was cold out, which is going to degrade the performance. So I got about 15 miles out of it. And, it's not necessarily something that, if you're looking for, for really a pure EV, this is not the vehicle for you. But if you want, a luxury 3-row SUV that gets really good fuel economy, overall, and, can also do a bit of electric driving, then, it's definitely one to consider. It's not inexpensive. This one was, it's a black label. It was like $84,000. So it was pretty much loaded with everything. But frankly, I would take this thing over the Lexus LX any day.
It's a little more modern, which I think,
and it's $20,000 less.
Yeah, well, this is not, this is not an off-road vehicle either.
Right. It's a different consumer.
Yeah, this is a vehicle for on-road driving, and it is the most powerful production Lincoln ever built. 400, almost just shy of 500 horsepower, 670 foot-pounds of torque. This thing is pretty quick. One other thing that I did note, in some driving modes, particularly if you put it in sport mode, at low speed, sometimes the engagement, of the clutches when it's switching between electric mode and hybrid mode, sometimes you can feel a little bit of a thunk, when it's engaging the clutch. When you switch it over to normal or econ mode, that pretty much goes away. It disappears. So I think it's just a matter of, they're engaging the clutches a little quicker to give you a little better performance when you have it in sport mode, and that affects the drivability a little bit. I've heard some complaints from a couple of people that drove it during the North American Car of the Year evaluations last fall, that they thought it was undrivable. And both this time and last summer when I drove it, that was absolutely not the case. It's not quite in sport mode. It's not quite as seamless as perhaps it should be, but in any other mode, it's perfectly fine.
Undrivable is kind of a extreme criticism, right? Like, you're actually driving the thing. Yeah. It's just especially with all-wheel drive systems, that kind of stuff is not uncommon, where you get some of the power transfer, sort of makes a bump here and there. Some of the Jeeps do it too. But I mean, I don't know that it's terribly acceptable either. Like you would hope that Lincoln can,
well, especially in a vehicle this expensive.
Yeah. So they'll have to figure that out, and maybe if it was a pre-production car, maybe they're still working on those calibrations or whatever. How's the visibility out the front?
It's typical of an SUV. It's not great
because that's apparently one of the critiques of the Explorer is that like the sight lines are bad, so there's a huge blind spot in front. Did you find that?
Not any more so than any other similarly sized SUV. No. The pillars are actually slimmer than on the old Explorer, substantially slimmer than on the old Explorer. So I think the visibility is actually better than previous generation Explorer.
It's just, we mock the 30-way seat, but those sort of minute adjustments can actually help you with that visibility. If the A-pillar is a little bit wider and you're able to move your seat back just a scooch or move it up a little bit or just make those fine-tune adjustments, that can really improve your visibility.
Oh, absolutely. And it's so funny now because everything we drive has power seats. And
except the Jeep Wrangler that I have that we'll get to.
We'll get to that. But it is weird when I get in a car with manual seats, and a good manual seat still allows for that fine adjustment. And a lot of manual seats are still not great. They're still, back in like 90s economy car adjustability wise. So yeah, no, that's I think that's right. You can get that 30-way seat sort of dialed in position-wise where you need it. I'm just, maybe I'm just not comfortable in my skin, so I shouldn't expect to be comfortable in a car. So,
well, I think, one of the challenges with manual seats especially is with height adjustment. Mm-hmm. You usually don't get much in the way of height adjustment with most manual seats. And that is an advantage you tend to get with, power seats like this is, being able to go up and down. So, depending on how tall you are, or lack thereof, that can be really valuable. I'm sure.
No, it's true. It is true.
Yeah.
I loved in my Volvo 740s, I had there's a little lever right on the near the tunnel, and you can adjust the height of the front and back of the seat. It had limited positions because it had pins, so it would lock. There was sort of 3 positions in front, 3 positions in the rear. But there's some cars now with the manual seats where they have like a little lever that you pump on the side, and you can get them up and down.
Yeah, and that certainly helps.
Yeah, it sure does.
But overall, to the visibility question, this is an issue not so much of the Aviator, but of SUVs in general, big SUVs in general. Where you've got a hood that's up high.
Yeah.
And that inherently is going to limit your visibility, especially forwards.
Yeah, I mean, you're just going to take out pedestrians, which is, I think, an increasing problem that nobody's really talking about. I stood next to an HD Chevy pickup the other day, and I was like, "Holy crap, it's taller than me."
Could you reach over the bumper?
Almost not. Like it was just.
I mean, those things are enormous.
They're high, and this one probably had a lift in it, but it was tall. And I was like, practically that's not useful for me. If I was using it for truck stuff, you can't get anything in it. You have to climb up into it, and just.
Rebecca, when you drove the LX, I mean, how did you find the visibility in that one?
Well, I didn't run over any small children, so I got that going for me.
Large animals.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's deceptive because the ride height gives you the impression that you see more, right? Because you're sitting up so high. So you get the impression that you've got full visibility when in reality, of course, your line of sight is compromised by what's in front of it. Yeah. So, I think that it's one of those things that you don't notice until you've hit that cone on a test track.
Yeah.
Until you test it, you don't realize that you don't have the visibility that you think you have.
Well, I think you see further. Like you'll see further down the road just because of the angle that you're at. You're
right.
I think you're right. I think it's deceiving. Nobody ever thinks about that distance in the front of the car, which you can't see because of the long hood of your seating position.
Yeah, and there was an article somewhere that was just published, or a study that was done. I think it was maybe a newspaper in California. They did a bunch of measurements. Basically, when you're in a big truck or SUV, yeah, you can see what's 250 feet down the road better because you're up higher. But it's that 30 feet right in front of your vehicle that you can't see anything in. I mean, it's a complete blind spot.
But that's
you
also
could,
why
you could hide me out of there.
Right. But that's also why I love the cameras that, like, when you put the car in reverse, it shows the back. And then I love the 360 view, and also the ones that when you put it in drive or forward, that it continues to show the space around your vehicle. I think those are, I wish that was a more common thing. Some vehicles do it. And it's funny because sometimes I think it's actually just because the system is slower, but it does help though in some ways. So, that's something that I think would be really effective, is to have a camera that, when you put it into drive, it doesn't immediately change and instead does show you that 10 feet or 15 feet directly in front of you.
Yeah, well, the problem with those is that they typically only work up to about 3 or 4 miles an hour, and then usually as soon as you get above crawling speed, then the camera switches off, and for a legitimate reason, because
absolutely
they don't want you looking at the screen,
right?
To navigate, when you're actually on the road.
No, not for that. No, we don't want you looking at the screen for the cameras, but we want you looking at the screen for every other goddamn thing while you're driving. Oh, sorry, that is a pet peeve, but no, it's true. Some of the systems.
How do you feel, Dan?
Look, it was an opening. I just had to take it. The Mercedes that I just had, the GLC300, was like that, where it would keep the screens on a bit as you sort of maneuvered around a parking situation. It would actually, as you in traffic, even as you got down to sort of stop and go, and it would you'd hear it sort of deploy. It had a rear camera that sort of folded up, so you'd hear it like zink.
Funny.
Fold up the camera and to bring them up on the screens. So I think that's something that they are paying attention to. And there's usually a button for the surround view monitoring on cars, so you can kick it on in traffic,
right? Which I do appreciate.
Yeah, it's nice. I kind of wish that we could just make the cars with enough glazing and visibility and maybe some smaller physical dimensions, so we didn't have to use cameras to make sure we don't crush things. It'd be nice.
They still make those. Some brands still make smaller cars like that.
Yeah.
And,
that's true.
If we could just convince people to buy them, they might continue to make them.
Yeah. I'm not exactly a poster child for small cars, although I do love them. I like the small car feeling. I like how cozy they are.
I'm sure we can pick you up a Smart at any time.
I'm all set with the Smart. All set. Good with that. But since I started talking about it, let me just keep rambling about the GLC300. Man, so that showed up and I expected to dislike it. And my first few hours with it were a little contentious because it's pretty sophisticated. It has the MBUX system, which is a change from command. So there's a bit of a learning curve. It has a little sort of touch sensor, just like this little mound that you have to interact with. And it took me some getting used to figure out where all the settings are. There's a lot of settings and just how you navigate back and forth between like nav and phone and that kind of stuff. But the tech doesn't define the vehicle, and the GLC as a vehicle is really, really, really good. It is that, speaking about sort of a smaller size, it's a little more compact. It's that good size. I think that the sort of personal crossover SUV size, it's, if you want to use a kind of a ridiculous term like an urban crossover or an urban SUV, it really does fit that need. It's just right for going into a city, in a parking garage. It's easy to park. It's very comfortable while you're in it. Everything feels really high quality. Everything you touch has been considered. The switch gear feels really nice, which is something that you can have the car that looks great, but if you use those window switches right, and there's that line of molding flash on there, you can feel it. It's those little things that sort of mar the experience, and the GLC has been really thoughtfully considered for all of those. It's very quiet, very comfortable. What engine noise you can hear is, 4-cylinder turbo. So it has a little bit of that gravel to it, but it's not offensive. It doesn't sound like it's not enjoying itself. It sounds good, and it gets to work with the 9-speed transmission really well. The chassis is really well composed. It handles well. It rides really well. All the drive modes, they make a difference. The steering feel was nice. I was actually surprised. The steering sort of weights up in the middle of a turn, which doesn't always happen these days. The back seat was kind of tight. I didn't find it terribly spacious, even with the front seat set for my sort of smaller stature. It was still a little tight for the kids, and the cargo area is good but not great. But it's a compact class of, I think it's like a B segment or maybe C segment SUV.
I think it's C.
I think it's yes,
it's a C.
Right.
Yeah,
and so this, I finally, while I had it, I figured out Mercedes naming convention. So the GLC is basically, it's the SUV equivalent of the C-Class sedan. The GLE is the SUV equivalent of the E-Class. I was like, holy crap, makes sense. But no, so I expected to really dislike it. And the more and more I drove it, the more it grew on me. I really liked it. I found MBUX actually, after a day or two, pretty intuitive and pretty quick to navigate. And the more time I spent with it, I think it would just get easier and easier. So, and I think that's the mark of a well-designed system where, yes, it's complex, and yes, there's a little bit of a learning curve at first, but after you spend some time with it, it becomes intuitive and easier to operate. And so I think that, deserves a sort of a compliment and a round of like, well done on Mercedes' part, because command wasn't great, and they've made it a lot better, I think, with MBUX. So, and to top it all off, I just like the way that the GLC looks. It just has that tidy sort of taut Mercedes look to it, that it's classically handsome. It's really nicely styled. It drives really solid. It was great in the winter weather. We had some snow while I had it. So I was really impressed with it. I liked it quite a bit.
Did you use the voice recognition much?
Not much, no. I used Apple CarPlay most of the time, which is weird to admit from my Luddite seat over here, but it worked pretty well with all of that. Why? Is there an issue with it that you wanted to?
No, I'm just curious because part of that MBUX system is a new
that's right, like
a natural language processing voice recognition system.
Yeah,
it's the voice rec part comes from Nuance, but it's a hybrid system. So there's part of it is embedded in the MBUX system locally in the vehicle. And then there's also a cloud component too, like you have with Siri or Google Assistant or Alexa, so that when you have connectivity, it will send your request. It'll process your requests in the cloud, where it has more capability to do more natural language style processing. But then if your connectivity is spotty or non-existent, then it has a subset of that capability locally. So I was just curious, if you'd messed around with that and how good you found it.
I hadn't, but I will make it a point the next time I have an opportunity. I should be able to get back into it in a couple of weeks. We're doing a winter vehicle award thing up here, so I'll be able to go play with it. But I really liked the way it drove. It was sporty enough for me in terms of chassis discipline, but I also felt like it was luxurious enough, like a Mercedes should feel. And fully loaded, it wound up at about 62,000, which is like, it's pricey. Don't get me wrong, but it was less expensive than I thought it would be.
Well, and I think you're right about the design of it. It's just a classically sort of timeless elegance. It will age well in the marketplace, and that's very appealing for consumers. And it's just, they've had some nice evolution. Speaking of grills, the front of it, I think, has aged well in previous editions. I think they've done a nice restrained job of expanding the grill without making this gigantic mouth that just feels like you're going to swallow it up. I'm still incredibly partial to the coupe version of it, just because as I've said before, it just screams, I don't have children.
Yeah.
And so, but I don't know. It's my little rebel.
Okay.
So,
all right.
but no, I think that it's been a while since I drove a Mercedes actually. But I think that they're just classically, traditionally beautiful vehicles. I think they've done a nice job.
Yeah. Well, and this one had the AMG line or whatever. So it has the AMG grille versus the standard grille. So it had, just the detailing and the design was, it's those subtle little things that, I think they define, especially that premium category. You can't just charge a lot of money and throw leather on everything. Like it really, it needs to feel like it was done with a purpose and look like it was done with a purpose. So the whole car I thought was, $62K again, didn't feel outrageous for it because it felt like it was worth it. Whereas there are some other cars that don't feel like that, which I'll get to in a sec.
I think that they're not just leaning on their brand name. They reward you with those touches and feels and materials. They reward you for purchasing a Mercedes. Like they don't let you forget it, Yeah. I feel like there's a constant reminder that you've purchased something special. I mean, I had that crazy, I had the GTC Roadster back in September. That was just, all sorts of fun. That was $162,000. But it was, you had no doubt that you were in a Mercedes at all times. And it was just nonstop fun.
Yeah. Yeah. And so the contrast to that is and I won't prattle on about it, but the Volvo XC90 T6 R design Polestar-Engineered. Which rolls
I think, off the tongue.
Yeah. Well, the Polestar-Engineered, I think, is a particular package. So this is another vehicle that it looks really great inside and out. It looks premium, but that's also where it sort of lets you down because unlike the Mercedes, where yes, it has a 4-cylinder turbo, but it didn't sound bad. It sounded, it's a good sounding engine. It has the right amount of power. The XC90 is bigger, so it's got a more powerful engine, but it's also a much heavier vehicle. So the engine feels like it struggles, and it also does not sound happy about it. You get a lot of engine noise in the Volvo, which I was surprised about. And it would have been better if it were good engine noise. It's not great engine noise. So that was disappointing. And it just chassis wise, I don't know why Volvo can't get this right. And this had the air suspension. Huge disappointment. It's clumsy. None of the steering's too slow. The ride and handling is just not graceful. But you're also not rewarded with good sort of reflexes. Like maybe in terms of hard numbers, you could manhandle this thing around a handling course and it would post okay times or whatever, or would do all right. It hates every single second of that. It's not like the Mercedes where you could make it hustle and it wouldn't mind. And that's maybe not terribly important with the XC90, but I guarantee you, if you walked over and stepped in an X5, it would feel sporty, and the XC90 doesn't.
Do you think that that's? I mean, it's interesting because I've had my pros and cons with Volvos myself. So the XC40 that I drove back and forth in one day to Pennsylvania. It was like, a 6-7 hour drive. I actually really liked that car. And the more I was in it, the more fun I had with it. The XC90, I do remember being quite restrained and not in a positive way. And not particularly emotionally engaging.
Yeah,
either.
So the XC40 is the CMA architecture, so it's a different platform, which I think, and it's just sort of a different slice of the market. So your expectations are a little different. For sure. But I liked the XC40 quite a bit. I liked the S60 and even the V60 Cross Country, which are based on the SPA platform that the XC90 is. I thought those actually, the S60, I thought rode and handled quite well.
Yes.
And just was a good overall premium European sedan. The XC90, for whatever reason, it doesn't feel as solid. It's hard to explain, but it feels like, it feels like they've cranked up the spring and damping rates, but this is the chassis isn't quite up to that stiffness. So you get a lot of harshness over stuff that you're not you shouldn't. It just should be able to soak that stuff up, and it makes it feel cheap. And it's not cheap. It's $80,000.
Yeah, it's not cheap.
Just like for 80 grand, I would not buy this.
And it sort of interrupts the experience then.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Right?
And it's,
because all of a sudden you're like, oh, boom.
Yeah.
Like that's not, yeah.
And so I told somebody the other day, I was like, look, if you want something that looks that good and has 3 rows, buy the Telluride.
Yeah. Absolutely.
It drives
100%.
Like
100%.
When I've driven the XC90, I've had a couple of different ones over the last several years. I didn't have that same experience with it. I wonder how much of that is the Polestar-engineered part of it.
I think that's a big part of it. Yeah.
Yeah, because Polestar, is their it was their performance sub brand. Now it's their EV sub brand, and so I think the Polestar Engineered is supposed to be a sport version of the XC90, and maybe that's just going a step too far for that particular vehicle.
Well, I think part of the problem is Volvo's inability historically to really tune a suspension for sportiness in its segment properly. I remember the original T5Rs were very capable cars, but man, did they suck in terms of ride. They were just super, super stiff. And this is the same kind of thing. It's got big wheels and short sidewalls. That does not help. And the air suspension, I think, has been problematic on the XC90. Every XC90 I've had with the air suspension has been surprisingly harsh, where you would expect air suspension to go the other way. And generally, like, I'm not a huge air suspension fan. And it has a lot of promise that generally is unrealized, I think, in my opinion, in terms of how it actually goes down the road. It's great if you want something cushy, but if you really want something that can be a chameleon, I think you're better off with the system that has, steel springs and adjustable dampers, and that generally gets you a lot further. But yeah, I don't know what it is. It's some sort of decision-making process or something where they tune it a certain way. Decisions are made, and here, at least in New England, on New England roads, it winds up being a little bit disappointing and not as, I don't know, not as competitive within its class. I'm just trying to think, like, if I were to drive a Mercedes or a BMW or an Audi, which are all its competitors, I can't imagine that they would feel as harsh. I think they would feel more poised in most situations.
And you don't, harshness is not good in any circumstance, but in some ways, like when you think about, like the X5M, like that, like harshness for a reason, because you've got it sport tuned, because you're expecting that you are in a sport mode. And I wish you could see my hands, because I'm like gripping them, like, oh, I want to go back.
We'll have to do a video podcast next year with the fake scene.
But it's like, you don't want it floaty.
No.
Right, because that's annoying.
You want it controlled and also supple at the same time.
Yeah, and right. So I think one of the things that makes it difficult when you get a vehicle that's this is the biggest version of the SPA, and so maybe that's they just can't get it rigid enough at that, to work that well in this version of it, where the S60 is a little smaller, so it's by its very nature probably a little bit more rigid, a little less susceptible to torsion and bending. So they can adjust the suspension differently. Because I didn't feel like that car was harsh, and it's the same parts in a lot of respects. This is also not the most high performing XC90. There's the T8 above this. That's the one that really has. It's got the hybrid, so it has a bit more performance. I think it's got like 100 more horsepower, which definitely helps. But the XC90 it has this niche of beautiful to look at, really comfortable to be in, 3 rows, relatively large. It's a good family SUV, but it has these weird areas where it lets you down, and so it's a little puzzling to me. And at least I haven't bitched about Census yet, which I'm not going to do because it's going away anyway. So who cares? Well, I'll complain about the next version. But I was hopeful that it would be better, but it's also like it's a 5-year-old car, right? The XC90 debuted in 2015. something like that.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, so it's due for some updates, and I think its class has started to eclipse it. So we'll see what they do with the next version or the mid-cycle refresh, which should be coming soon, I hope.
So I was driving the 2020 Wrangler Unlimited Rubicon 4x4, which is just fun.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah. Well,
if you're into that sort of thing.
So it's the Wrangler Unlimited Rubicon 4x4. What powertrain?
So this one has, I'm sorry, I have to take my glasses off. It has a 2.0 liter inline four.
Oh, the turbo Wrangler is the best Wrangler. That's great.
Yeah.
I liked it a lot.
And that's also the e-torque.
It's
the
really
mild hybrid.
Yes, it does. It's really, really nice. I mean, I drove it. I haven't driven it a ton, unfortunately, but I've been running errands yesterday and today in it. Yesterday was raining a lot, and it was surprising. This one has the cloth roof, which I was able to put open today, which was super cool. But this one has the cloth roof, and at low speed in traffic yesterday, I was really pleasantly surprised that it was pretty quiet. I did make a note in my review after the ride and drive that there was some wind noise at higher speeds. You're going to get that. But just driving around town, going 25 to 35 miles an hour, I was pleasantly surprised. I also didn't have anybody in the vehicle with me, so we weren't having a conversation, but it didn't matter because the radio was soft and I was able to hear it. And I had a conversation. I talked on the phone with somebody. And so, it was a good experience overall. Today, then I drove it around a little bit more and took some twisties, was again running some errands and visiting some different people and had the opportunity to use it as I would in a day-to-day environment. Obviously, ideally, you want to go off-road in this thing, but that is not to be. So, but I'm so impressed with how well behaved this vehicle is on road, knowing the crazy things that you can do with it off road. Yeah. That to me is like really, really fun.
That does always sort of impress me about the Wrangler. And I tend to get tired of the Wrangler after a week with them. I'm like, okay, it's out of my system for a while, but they're pretty impressively refined for something that's just the same basic design going back,
Well, especially this new generation.
New generation.
Is really good. Yeah. The contrast between the JK and the JL is big.
It is. I mean, my brother has the JK, and I agree with you, Dan. I'm like, okay, thanks, bye, thanks for the ride, see ya. And I also have a much more difficult time getting in and out of his than I do this one for some reason. And I don't know why. And I don't know. I think he's got the fully loaded. I think he does have this exact same one, the Unlimited Rubicon, because the price point was crazy like this one is. And, for whatever reason, this one is just, I can get in and out of it easily. So it was interesting. It does have manual seats. And at first I had a little trouble figuring out what it could and could not do. But then this morning I was able to adjust the height of it, which then let me put it back a little bit, but greatly improved my visibility in it and my comfort level also. And so that's where, when we were talking earlier about manual versus electric, I would love to have an electric seat. I understand why it doesn't have it, obviously, with it being like basically a vehicle you can wash it out and you can get wet. But it's something that you just have to play around with the seat a little bit more and give it a little time to figure out what you can and can't do with it. But, it's so iconic. And I love the fact that they really have honored what the brand is and what this vehicle is. But at the same time, they have made it where you really can use this vehicle on a day-to-day basis. And, I've said it before and I'll say it again. It's the busboys and billionaires. I mean, you see Jeep Wranglers at the smallest houses here in Greenwich and at the biggest ones.
I think you definitely need to be more of a billionaire to afford where the Wrangler has gone.
Well,
and so how many of the Wranglers do you see have been just like sort of fetishized with like the angry eye grills and all kinds of add-on, the most disgustingly ugly wheels you've ever seen, and Punisher stickers. Funny. Actually,
today I saw a JK that was just a two-door. I was amazed.
Those are weird to see now, aren't they?
It was. It was shocking. It was really shocking to see. So this one has a starting price of 41,795. And then the destination charge is $14.95. I think that's one of the highest in the industry for non.
Is it just a place where they sort of like slug away some extra costs where they're like, yeah, we can quote you a different price. We're going to charge you more for destination, and we're going to,
I'm actually really surprised. And so then this price is out at $59,275. I mean, that's an incredible amount of money.
Like I don't know what's
a Mercedes GLC.
Well, sure, but I'm just thinking like it's like the full size pickups too, or like the sort of full on luxury pickups. Depending on your buying situation, right? Like if you're a successful billionaire business person or whatever, like you can buy it as your company vehicle, right, and amortize it over 7 years. So. Yeah, whatever.
I don't think it weighs enough.
Oh, maybe it doesn't. That's true. The big pickups too.
No, well, you can still lease it, like if you lease it as a company vehicle.
Okay,
right.
I mean, there's tax credits on heavy duty vehicles that you wouldn't get on this, but you can still get tax breaks, as a company lease.
Right, and beyond with the sort of tricky bookkeeping, they will give you a very long loan on that.
Yes, they will. But so just a couple of things on this one. This one actually does have the cold weather package, which has the heated steering wheel, heated front seats, remote start, because the one that I had on the ride and drive was like 52,000 and it did not have heated seats. And I remember just thinking for 52 grand.
Right. Like that should just be standard.
So the one that I drove on the event was 53,645 and it did not have heated seats and steering wheel. It didn't have the cold weather pack.
That's crazy.
And I agree, especially because even if you're out in the desert, even if you're in Nevada, you can use a cold weather pack because you can use heated seats. You want to put the top down or something like, so those are things that I just feel like you use I use them all the time, no matter where I am. But yeah, so this one at least had that, but I mean, it's an insane amount of money, but it's also a vehicle that you can very gracefully drive and in comfort to work and then just go badass off on the weekends.
Hey, Rebecca, I'm curious, the soft top, is that like a fully lined multi-layer top?
It doesn't appear to be fully lined. So it's the Sky One Touch Power Top. It was fairly thick, but I don't believe it's lined. But it didn't flap at all, which I was again very surprised about. I'll get back to you on that.
Okay, I'm just curious, because you commented on how quiet it was, and so I'm just curious, if it had some insulation built into there.
I know it just fit so tight. Like that's again what I was really surprised about is that the fit on that roof is really, really nice.
It is.
And then it goes.
It's a pretty thick material too. So even if it's not insulated,
right? It goes all the way back. I looked back and it is like all the way back with one touch. And but I just again was very, very surprised. I haven't taken it on the highway yet. I will do that tomorrow.
That's where they fall down. So they're loud on the highway.
Well, yeah, and that's NVH is very specific to circumstances.
Yeah, and it's especially with the when you get a Rubicon, you do get all-terrain tires, and so those are going to make a lot more noise at highway speeds.
Yes, exactly. And again, that's where I posted something on our Twitter account on Twitter Reviews about how quiet it was, but I was on at low speed in town roads, so I'm not taking it on the highway. As I said, I'll do that tomorrow.
Yeah. I don't know about the full soft top, but there's the Wrangler with the hard top, the Dejeo with the hard top, and they have the cloth roof in it. That is made by a company called Hearts, and they use a specific fabric for it that has, I think, PVC in it or something. I don't know. Anyway, somebody else can do the research and get back to us.
Is that the one out in Massachusetts?
Yeah, they're in Acton.
Yeah, my dad actually used to call on them.
Oh, really?
Yes, because he was in. They used to flame treat it, or do some kind of heat application on different materials, and he used to go there.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, so it's that particular material. I don't know. Again, I don't know if the regular soft top is made out of this, but that portion of the roof and the soft roof and the hard top versions is twill fast, which is it's a 3-ply material, and there's a rubber inner layer, which will that will add some mass and some sound deadening. So maybe it's the same material used on the soft top. I don't know. They're actually super nice people. I've met them.
They're super nice people. No, they were really lovely. And when my father passed away, they were very, very kind and very, very sweet. But also what's impressive is that, again, the fit of that top is very, very tight. If at any time that gets compromised, then I could see where it might be really loud.
Yeah, right. And that's one of the things with the JL. They made the top easier to use.
Yes, it's one
the JK was so confusing. Yeah,
no, it's amazing. It's one touch. It goes all the way back. I mean, I was in a convertible, in 10 seconds, and then I put the heated seats on and steering wheel, and I was happy.
Yeah. And January.
But yeah, I mean, the pricing is definitely, something that can be a deal breaker for some people if you get it all dolled up. Because the base, I mean, the Wrangler Unlimited Sahara 4x4 starts at $28,295. So, there's this huge range, sort of like the Aviator. It's sort of actually like a lot of cars these days. There's this great big huge range of price points, and which is good because then you can decide what your budget is. Yeah.
Well, and the Wrangler, if you're going to sort of load anything up with all of the options and pay for it, that's a good one to do it with. Not that I ever suggest anybody go into that kind of debt, but it holds its resale.
It does.
You can't.
It does for sure.
A cheap Wrangler is never cheap. Like you're gonna they all go for good money. Even like go try to find a TJ.
It's true. So. It's amazing.
You had posted about the Wrangler to the car review tweets. Twitter, and you got some sort of commentary back, which it's valid critique to a degree, but also just sort of how the reviewer kind of ecosystem might work.
Critiquing the critique.
Yeah, which it's fine, and we're open to it. And it was just I think it deserves sort of a mention and a little bit of discussion.
Yeah, so I had posted just briefly because that's what our brief Twitter car reviews are,
right?
Just about how pleased I was with the NVH and that, and somebody came back and said, well, Motor Trend said the exact opposite. I'm like, well, that's fine. That's the beauty of it being an opinion,
right? You're like, this is there are opinions in this one is mine, which I think it's valid. And I sort of made a joke. I was like, we're the reviewers people should listen to.
Exactly.
It's like as they say, opinions are like certain body parts.
Correct.
Everybody's got one.
Right.
And I think the comment from this person to reply to your comment, Rebecca, he said, but with conflicting opinions like these, any wonder many consumers don't take journalists seriously, and those who do get seriously confused about what to believe. My opinion helps all to remain discontent with such comment or such content. And I think especially when you're talking about reviews, these are, as you say, opinions. And they are completely, in many ways, most ways, probably, especially for us, because we don't do instrumented testing, is they are completely subjective, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with having very divergent opinions on a particular vehicle.
Well, I think they're subjective, but they're also informed. And then, I think it's valid too to say, like, you should always look at it with a skeptical eye, especially when a lot of folks who are looking for reviews, they don't know how to put their preferences or their thoughts and feelings into order or into words as well as we do. And so you've got to sort of look at what the reviewers are saying and whether you think that the criticisms are valid, invalid. Some people will think that our the way we ramble on about infotainment isn't important, where others will,
and they're wrong.
Exactly.
And because it's not important to them, right? Or I've had people say like, "Oh, Census is fine," and we've complained about Census or iDrive or whatever, and it's like, okay, like if you find it easy to use, I get it, but we're in a lot of cars, and some of this stuff is harder to figure out than others, and here's my informed take on that. And, you can choose to take it or leave it. I'm not going to get offended either way. And we're certainly not going to get in an argument. And I don't want to be doing that here either. I don't think that's what we're doing. But I think it's valid. I think it's a valid thing to say, is it any wonder that people get confused? Like, no, I don't think it's a wonder that people get confused. But also, like, we're trying to sort of lay our cards out on the table too.
Right. And the important thing, sorry, Rebecca,
no, go ahead.
I just want to say one thing, the important thing, as a reviewer is to provide context about why, what is your rationale for your opinion? And as long as you can provide some justification for your opinion, then, anybody reading that review or listening to that review can say, okay, that matches up, with my lifestyle or my use case, or it doesn't. And then you're better off, to look for someone that, that does, that is looking at it from the same perspective you are. For me, when I talk about SUVs that I may not like, I try to give the context of here's why I don't like this. And it's not just I don't like this, but here's why I don't like it, and here's why it might be the right fit for a particular customer. And that's I think that's really the important thing when you're reviewing this stuff, is to provide that background of why you feel about it one way or another and who you think it might be right for. And when you do that, yes, you're going to get divergent opinions because people are coming at it from different perspectives. They have different points of view. And, if you have to find the reviews that meet that point of view. And, I think for us, we're typically trying to come at it from the perspective of the average person that might be looking to buy a vehicle, and what are they going to get for their money out of this product?
And I think also, and you're absolutely right, Sam, that's the thing, is that this is, I go back and forth. On the one hand, I want to give my perspective. On the other hand, I realize that I am shorter than 99% of all adults. But at the same time, for shorter people, they're like, hey, you know what? That's really good to know. And, I did a I don't know what they're called, like IGTV or something, with my brother that I posted onto Instagram, and he's 6'3". And one of my followers wrote and said, that was so helpful getting his perspective. I'm the same size as your brother. And it just demonstrates to me that, it's just because I may be at, 1% of the population and not the tall version of it, it doesn't mean that people aren't going to find it helpful to know that kind of information.
Yeah. And I don't think that that's where the comment was sort of going. But yeah, no, I agree.
Well, he reached out to me later and said it was actually supposed to be a dig at Motor Trend, which I wasn't really sure why. I was going to say. It was like, I was going to say, like, listen, I don't agree with the Motor Trend guys usually, but I always learn something about that kind of person and what they like. But like, that's the thing. Like, you could read reviews. You can almost like hate read stuff, right? And you challenge yourself and you learn a different perspective. And that's what's like I was so unimpressed with the Lamborghini Urus, for example. But I read Johnny Lieberman's thing in Motor Trend about it, and it just sort of pointed out a few things that made me appreciate it a little more in that Johnny Lieberman way. Right.
So I mean, it's valid. Continue to criticize us. We'll take it. We might fire back.
And on that theme, I'd like to jump into a user or a listener email that we got a couple of weeks ago, and it's continuing along this same theme of our perspective on different vehicles, and this one had to do with EVs, and I'm pretty sure the same person was a person who gave us a rather negative review on Apple Podcasts, and the let me just read this. So, hi, I genuinely enjoy listening to your podcast, but listening to your EV and PHEV recommendations on your most recent podcast, I was struck by your best advice is to wait a couple of years from now for new EVs and EV infrastructure. The really only sane advice for an occasional 350-mile trip is using the Tesla supercharger network. I would suggest you try to check periodically your preconceived notions about the quality of Tesla vehicles and not dogmatically steer people away for fear their vehicles won't last. Every new electric vehicle is by definition an all-new or a very new platform. The idea that traditional automakers do EVs better and more reliably than Tesla is something you cannot say at this point in time. What you can say is that qualitatively, the experience of owning a Tesla in terms of things people care about, like range, performance, and charging, is better than traditional automakers if you listen to owners, the EPA, and just about everyone else who experiences it. When you recommend a 4-year-old used Leaf or Mitsubishi Outlander PHEV, for gosh sakes, it makes me supremely glad, very glad, giddy in fact, that if I randomly selected 6,000 people off the street, only about one would have ever heard of wheel bearings, Sam, Rebecca, or Dan.
Wow.
Wow, that's hilarious.
So let me respond to this.
Well, I mean, okay. So, no, to be fair,
let me go to the ER because I am burned.
There are some valid points there. We didn't recommend the Mitsubishi. I said something about it. I was like, listen, you could buy the Mitsubishi.
Yeah.
But there are valid points there. But I think, at least from my perspective, when I steer people away from Tesla, it has nothing to do with their EV prowess. Every time somebody brings up Tesla to me, I say they do great, motors, batteries, powertrain, power management, like all the EV stuff, fantastic. They're not as good, demonstrably not as good at building a freaking car. And that is a big deal. And the supercharger network, yeah, I guess for now, but that's at some point there's going to be the lines are going to cross, and that's going to be an obsolete network that they're going to have to scramble to upgrade. Sorry. So I'm sorry, Sam, go ahead.
Go ahead, Rebecca.
I'm sorry. I feel like you say that a lot to me, and I appreciate that.
That was another email, but we don't need to get into that.
Oh no! I think it's very important to say that nobody wants Elon Musk to fail. Nobody wins if Tesla fails. It does not. But there's this such extreme between the haves and the have-nots, the Tesla-rati, and oh my gosh, you hate them. That's not true. I have considered myself for years now a Tesla realist. I want Elon Musk to succeed because I think it helps the industry, and I think it's a good thing that he pushes the envelope. But the idea that we have blind faith one way or the other just is not a fair assessment of how we look at the brand, I think.
And I agree with that. And, we have all said repeatedly on this show that, clearly the industry would not be moving in the direction it is at the speed it is right now had it not been for the success of Tesla to the degree it's had success so far. They have spurred the entire industry and demonstrated to the entire industry that EVs can be a realistic, viable proposition that a lot of consumers actually want to buy, not just that they have to buy because they, because they're trying to virtue signal or, they feel a certain way, but it's, they're creating a product that people actually want to buy. That said, I think, we've also made clear, as Dan said, that, we think that, for all the good that Tesla has done, we don't think it's a particularly well-run company for a lot of reasons. And, we don't need to rehash that right now. But also to address a couple of specific points in this email here, it says the really only sane advice for an occasional 350-mile trip is using the Tesla supercharger network
or rent a car.
Actually, no, that's nonsense.
Right.
If you have an occasional 350-mile trip, but you want to drive an EV, the sane advice is to buy a used Leaf, and then for those occasional trips, rent a car.
Yeah,
rent an ICE car. Because if you use it occasionally and it's not something that you're driving every day, then you're not having it's not having the kind of impact of for example, driving a Tahoe on a daily basis, when it's only one or two people in the car. That's stupid. That's insane. But, if if you want something, if you have a 10 or 15 mile commute, owning a Nissan Leaf or, some other lower cost EV makes a lot more sense to do that on a daily basis, or even to have a conventional, an ICE vehicle that is much less expensive, and even a used, older vehicle, from a pure cost analysis, pure economic point of view for the average consumer that can't afford a $40,000 or $50,000 car, owning having a $20,000 or even a used $10,000 Corolla is a lot more sane. But even if you're going to have something like a used Leaf, and then rent a Tahoe or a minivan, a couple times a year, if you've got to take the kids on a road trip to go visit the grandparents or to go to Disneyland or something, that's actually a lot more sane than, owning a very expensive car that you're not taking advantage of all of its potential capabilities on a daily basis.
I think there's that. We do it with regular cars too. And I think what it comes down to is the, like, if I had to, I could kind of thing. And in the sense that the Tesla has the range and they have the charging network. Yes, I agree. If that's something that you are regularly doing and you want to do it EV, sure, it might make sense. You can even get a used Tesla. That's fine. Mm-hmm. But I think part of that question, and maybe I'm mistaken, but part of the original question was there was an economic factor to it as well. We were looking at costs. And so some of the suggestions, we were trying to keep the costs lower, and which drives, those other suggestions. And when you're talking about a used car, any used car, like I recommend the Camry and the Corolla, and those are not cars that excite me to drive in any way. But they're
affordable and reliable.
Right. So, and that's the same thing I'm doing. I'm going to recommend a Leaf because Nissan has been at it a very long time. And that car has most of its bugs worked out. Yeah, it's not a Tesla, but you can get a used Leaf for a very good price, and it has enough range to really cover most of your needs. A Bolt, same thing. The Bolt is very well done. I think it's sort of not on anybody's radar, even though it's been in production for a long time. And you can pick one up and it's going to work, kind of as advertised, reliably. And there's dealer networks and support structures around. And that's the other side of car ownership. And not everybody wants to be a beta tester for the manufacturer. And I think that you run into this, like, well, you should listen to the owners. Well, kind of. But if you listen to owners of a lot of cars who sort of they're in love with their car, right? Like when I was in the rear wheel drive Volvo thing for a number of years, the little pocket of enthusiasts. There's always that sort of like comparison of like, our cars are better than anybody else's cars, and those cars over there that are the competitor group or whatever, the rivals, well, they're not good because they don't do these things. And so there's always that grain of salt you have to take with the owner's perspective, and a lot of owners don't actually know what they're talking about. So
there is that.
Not to pull that card, but like, I don't know. This just gets to wind up. I'm going to make us get more emails. So I'm going to stop talking. But
you're right. I mean, the original. I think what the original recommendations that that this writer was responding to, were based on as we talked about earlier. It's based on context. What the question that was we were trying to answer the question that was being asked. Somebody had a budget that they were working to, and so we were trying to give some recommendations that would fit that budget. In this case here, if you can afford a Tesla and you want to buy a Tesla, go for it. Be my guest. I'm not going to stop you. But it's just not, just as, a Miata is not the right choice for, at least 1% of the population, it's, a Tesla or any other car is not the right choice for, some portion of the population.
So I think also there's a couple things to remember. Fuel economy standards and the zero emission vehicle mandate out of California. It's not a suggestion. It's a mandate.
Mhm.
has also been pushing the development of electric vehicle technology. I don't know that Tesla has pushed adoption rates of electric vehicles. They've pushed adoption rates of Teslas that happen to be electric.
I think they've pushed consideration of electric vehicles.
Yeah, and they've also
But have they pushed adoption of it?
I don't know. I think that's a good point, but I think they've at least put them on other people's radar to the point where other automakers have seen that it's a viable business.
Well, the other automakers don't have a choice because the California ZEV mandate.
Right, but they've shifted from building compliance cars to now saying, "Oh, there's a niche in that premium marketplace."
Absolutely, so. And that was a key. That was a key flaw in, like, I'm just going to pick on GM for a minute, because as we've heard before, if the Volt with a V, if that had been a Cadillac, I think they would have been much better. And if it actually had looked at the XLR, was it? Or the ELR, rather?
Yep.
That was a beautiful looking vehicle. But at the end of the day, it turned out that it was a tarted up Volt and nobody was going to pay the kind of money for it. So the strategy, what Tesla has done so well is they have married technology with a beautiful vehicle, with the mystique that is Elon Musk.
And all that's the difference. The mystique is a big part of it. And
it is a huge part of it. And so, when I was doing work in Saudi, we were looking at who was buying electric vehicles, and there were 3 distinct profiles. And the Tesla buyer was completely different than the Nissan Leaf buyer. And those were primarily the 2 that we compared it with. The Nissan Leaf buyer had 2 different types of people. One was actually wealthier than the other one and more educated. The other one was more economic and environmentally motivated. But it was very distinct. And when I look at vehicles like the Audi e-tron that is so good and size appropriate for today's marketplace, whether you agree with it or not, and the fact that isn't just booming, to me, says that this is less, the Tesla success is not so much centered 100% around electrified vehicles, but it's really around a variety of factors.
Oh, well, granted, as good as the e-tron is in a lot of ways, and I think the same also applies to the Taycan and some others.
Sure.
They the European premium brands have fallen way short in terms of trying to be competitive with Tesla, on the very things that this writer, is highlighting, not so much the performance, but certainly the range, is as irrational as it may be, do you really need, 350 miles of EV range? No, probably not. And we've discussed that before. But, if you're going to try to compete in the marketplace, where you've got Tesla over here with 300 plus miles of range and all you can manage to scrape up is 200 miles, or in the case of the Taycan Turbo S, 192, I think, or 194, you look at that, it's like, oh man, I don't know. It's frustrating. I think they have fallen short, and we've been critical of those brands for doing that, especially, when prior to launching those vehicles, they talked so much about, getting 300 miles of range with these vehicles. But what they didn't tell you was all the little asterisks. Oh, this is on the European NEDC drive cycle, which is a completely meaningless test that, is wildly and over optimistic, so we've had plenty of criticism to share across the industry for this stuff.
Yeah,
but I just feel like when people, I'm sorry,
no, carry on.
I feel like when people talk about Tesla, they brag about the torque, which is a result of the electric vehicle obviously being electrified. They brag about autopilot, about being quiet. They're not bragging about, hey, come and check out my electric vehicle. They say, come and check out my Tesla.
Well, yeah, that's true. And I think that they do. Yeah, I mean, the amount of vanity plates speaks to this, where they like to say, I'm not using any gas. There's that virtue signaling there. And okay, fine. it's just it's a lifestyle. It's a conspicuous purchase, and the product, it has its pluses. But me as a car buyer, if I'm looking to drop that kind of money on it, the customer experience needs work, and the way the company, the way the company is run. Like, look, I choose not to do business with companies that I don't agree with their professional ethics, and that is a company I disagree with heartily in terms of its professional ethics. And so I won't do business with them. I mean, I refused earlier today. I was like, we're not going to go see the concert that's at Mohegan Sun because I don't agree with casinos. Like, it's the same thing. Like, I just like, you can buy one if you want one, if you believe it, if you want to put up with the stuff, if you want to own the thing, fine. I'm sure you'll like some aspects of it and you won't like other aspects of it. Cool. And if it works for you, fine. This goes back to, I think, again, understanding the source. And I'm glad that we have a listener who will sort of give it to us. Like, it's just like, okay. But you kind of like, this is where we're coming from. And if you disagree, go buy a Tesla. And I hope you're happy with it. And please tell us why you love it. And that might help us understand the ownership experience better.
And hopefully you don't accidentally make an in-app purchase in the Tesla app.
Yeah. But I mean, the idea that, the podcast isn't viable because we're not Tesla files is just absurd. It's childish.
Yeah.
All right. And on that,
breathe, cleansing breath.
Okay.
Wait, did somebody really send an email that I interrupt you a lot, Sam?
No, it's the other way around, that I interrupt you too much. And if I do, I'm sorry.
Oh, I don't feel like that at all.
But just keep in mind that we are talking to each other over Skype. Where there's always some inherent latency, and we can't see each other's faces. It's not like we're sitting around a table, and so sometimes we may talk over each other. We try. I think we all try not to.
Yeah.
But occasionally it does happen.
But we have a live thing in the works soon. I should make sure I book airfare for that, or book a car to drive, because I don't like the carbon footprint of flying. So
I'm grateful that somebody is standing up for me, but I appreciate that. But I don't feel like you interrupt me, and so I'm sorry if it comes across like that. That's too bad, because that's definitely not the vibe.
Was an email from Larry by any chance?
Just my big brother Larry. He's definitely going to come and beat you up.
No, it was not from Larry.
Larry's more likely to ask you to smoke a joint.
Yeah,
but that's
hey, is that legal in Connecticut?
I don't know, but it is in California where he lives.
It is fully legal in Massachusetts. I swear to God. I mean, I go skiing on Fridays with my son. He's in the ski club, and man, there are times when you go to the mountain and you're just like, whoa, kids. With the
well, let's just say when you asked me about NAMM at the beginning of the show, I did leave out that part.
Yes.
As the day went on, there were definitely people that had a more interesting aroma.
That's when you get them to buy stuff.
Exactly. I don't know and not just snacks. Not just snacks.
I don't know if high people are as suggestible as drunks. I spend enough time around drunk people. You figure out how you can sort of push them in which direction you want them to go. If you stay, anyway. We are totally off topic. So let's get back on topic. What else do we want to talk about?
So what's good now that pot is becoming legal everywhere
is you smell it everywhere.
Well, there's that, but eventually someday you won't have to worry about being impaired and driving, because you might actually possibly have autonomous vehicles. And Cruise this past week showed us what they're getting prepared for that. And Cruise, for those who don't recall, is Cruise Automation is a company that GM bought in 2016 to develop their production automated driving system. And since then, SoftBank and Honda both put money into it, and they took equity stakes in Cruise. And this week, Cruise in San Francisco showed off the Cruise Origin. When Honda jumped into the fray in late 2018 with GM and Cruise, part of that deal was that Honda and GM would collaborate on developing a purpose-built automated vehicle for Cruise. And the reason for that is because, up until now, Cruise has been using a fleet of modified Chevrolet Bolts, just as everybody else in this business has been using various modified production vehicles for their development purposes. But frankly, none of the vehicles that you can go out and buy today are really well suited to being robotaxis because, they don't have things like doors that close automatically. And, they still have all kinds of other stuff that you don't need for a robotaxi, like steering wheels and pedals and all kinds of other, little, trivial things. So, so they, Honda and GM and working together with Cruise have developed a vehicle that they call the Cruise Origin, which is a robotaxi. And this is the kind of vehicle, there's already some vehicles out there that are not fundamentally different, things like the Navia Arma and, there's various other developmental, robotaxis. One of the things about the Origin is that, it really takes into account a lot of the stuff I've been talking about for the last several years and a lot of the talks I give at conferences, which is this idea of robotaxis need to be modular. And so you need to rethink the architecture of the vehicle. Today when manufacturers design vehicles, they design them to, last 10, 15, 20 years, go, a couple 100,000 miles. When you start talking about the robotaxi application, ideally, these things are running all day, carrying people, delivering packages and so on. And, getting very high utilization. They're not sitting around parked 95% of the time, like our conventional vehicles are. And so, these things are going to be racking up, maybe 100,000 miles a year or more. And if you took a conventional vehicle, that thing would be worn out in 2 or 3 years and you scrap it and you start over again. What Cruise and GM and Honda have done is they came up, they developed a vehicle where the basic structure of the vehicle, is designed to last 1 million miles. So the structure, the chassis, all that stuff designed for 1 million miles of use. And then all the stuff that goes into it is modular and is designed to be easily replaced. So things like the sensors, when you've got a technology like automated driving where it's evolving quickly, 2 or 3 years from now, the sensors you're using may well be obsolete and you want something that has better performance, lower cost. Same thing with the communication system, as we're going from 4G to 5G to whatever comes after that, and because these things are going to be used for people getting in and out all the time, you want interior seating and things that are designed for this kind of use case, that are going to be durable and easy to clean. You want things like doors that close automatically. If you have, 1 million Tesla Model 3 robotaxis, people get out of the vehicle, they may or may not close the door completely, then the car is stuck there and it can't move. And, and it's not like a regular taxi or a ride hail vehicle where, you've got a driver there that can go around and close the door if the passenger gets out and doesn't close it properly or leaves the trunk lid unlatched. All this stuff is taken care of in this design, to really, it's addressing what you actually need for this kind of use case. So,
it seemed like there was a little bit of disappointment with it, though, when it debuted the other day. Although people were saying like, yeah, they're not messing around; they're pretty serious. But I guess, can you sort of speak to impressions of how it was received?
Well, yeah, I mean, this is not a. How shall I put this? This is not a real design statement. It's not some sexy looking new sports car. It's basically a box on wheels, which is what all of these things are going to be. It's going to be a box on wheels, because that is what you actually want for that kind of use case. You want something that's easy to get in and out of, easy to put stuff in, and because there's no operator there, you've got, like I said, you got to deal with those other issues. I think, to some degree, the design team has done some interesting things with this thing. Like, the way they've incorporated the Cruise colors, the orange, white, black, for some of this, it's not, it's got a little more style to it, but it's never going to be something really cool and sexy looking because that kind of vehicle doesn't make sense for this kind of application. A few years ago at CES, Mercedes showed a concept called the FO15, which was this really sleek looking thing, and that, it's cool, but it makes no sense for a robotaxi. You want something that's more upright, and in the case of the Origin, they've got seating for 6, everybody facing the middle of the vehicle. So you got lots of leg room, easy to move around. It's, it's a much better use case.
It's sort of the evolution of what we've seen in the interiors of airplanes, right? Like, a private plane looks very different than a typical 737 or Airbus A380 or something. When you look at a private plane, they're small, they've got couches, like they've got all sorts of crazy things going on. And that's great for that purpose. But what we're talking about is not private ownership of vehicles. We're talking about a public space, right? I mean, that's nobody's going to have these in their driveway. This is a public space. This is a way to get from A to B.
Isn't that kind of a bus?
That's a different thing. Yes.
Yeah, well, it's a minibus.
Don't get me started. Don't get me started on calling things.
No, and that, that's essentially, I mean, what we're talking about here, is microtransit. It's all about, right size, getting the right size vehicle for every trip. So vehicles like this are, first of all, never going to be sold to consumers. This is only going to be used for mobility services.
Right.
But it's also, a case of, it's something where, buses and subways and so on are great for routes where you have a lot of people going the same direction. But there's a lot of trips that we take in urban areas where you don't have a lot of people going the same direction at the same time.
Or I guess areas that aren't urban too, like those still need mobility. So, okay.
Right. And that last mile sort of thing.
Yeah. And so, that's why, there isn't a single silver bullet solution. I think there's a lot of people in urban areas that should be taking buses and subways and trains, but there's a lot of trips where that doesn't make sense. And that's why, transit systems are so challenged when it comes to their finances, because they have to try to service as much of a city as they can, provide service, but there's not enough utilization on a lot of those routes or at certain times of the day to make it economically viable.
Well, so that's another question I have is like, who says that transit has to necessarily make revenue? It provides others the ability to make that revenue, like, right? It provides.
It doesn't need to make a profit. It doesn't need to make a profit. Well, it needs to pay for itself, though.
Or does it? Or does it? Because by providing that mobility, this is always the knock on it. Like, well, how are we going to pay for it? And it's like, well, I mean,
in some capacity, though,
I suppose. But if you provide enough mobility, right, you can get people to work, and then those, in theory, I know this is a beautiful theory, those people will pay taxes, and those taxes will be the revenue that offsets the cost of the system.
If it facilitates job creation, then by all means. But it's what you're really focusing on is convenience. We have seen with the explosion of Uber and Lyft and such that people will pay for convenience. They will pay.
Some people will pay for it.
But a lot of people that can.
Well, but the crazy thing is, like, those people, they can pay for convenience, and they're paying ostensibly for convenience, but they're not getting it. They're actually paying to make everything for everybody else, including themselves, less convenient because they're adding to congestion.
Absolutely. I mean, New York City, I have never seen it so crowded, and it's ridiculous. And you can spot an Uber or Lyft driver a mile away because they're driving differently than the yellow taxis, right? Because those drivers know where they're going. They're professionals.
Yeah, the yellow taxis is like, I'm always amused by those rides. It's like, all right, it's like riding the back of NASCAR with no seatbelt.
Absolutely. No, you know what's so funny though, Dan, is seriously, like, I remember, because I actually didn't drive in New York until I was in my 20s, even though I grew up because we didn't need to. Yeah. We just take the train.
Yeah, you take the train. Yeah.
Right. But I remember having lived in Boston for 13 years, when I moved back to this into the metro New York area, the traffic was far more predictable in Manhattan because you were dealing with yellow taxis and that was your main foe.
Yeah.
In Boston, you're dealing with everybody.
Yeah.
And so it was very unpredictable to me. And I actually got into the rhythm of driving in New York because you anticipate that, that yellow taxi driver is going to be unbelievably offensive, right? He is he's driving in defensive mode.
Yeah.
You then have to drive in appropriate manner.
But see, that's the thing. You can mix it up with the taxis, and they don't mind. Like, they'll be aggressive, but if you're aggressive back, like, oh, okay, at a certain point,
that's expected. That's expected. With Uber and Lyft dominating the roads today, it's not. You don't know what you're getting because you've got people that are everyday drivers driving other people around. They're not qualified. They don't know where they're going. They have not had the same type of training, and it's a really different thing. But my whole point is that people, this mobility, the evolution in mobility, we have to migrate. It has to evolve towards convenience because it doesn't evolve towards groups. Like that's why carpooling is not that popular, because you can't, as Sam said, it's about getting the mass to a certain direction. But that funnel, as you get closer to that location, the funnel gets narrower and narrower as to how many people actually need to go to that spot.
Yeah, that's true.
And people, right? And people will pay for the convenience of getting dropped off right at their doorway.
I still think, it just is going to take one really solid economic downturn, and then carpooling is going to be back. But it's actually the economic side of it is interesting to me, just because SoftBank is an investor, and man, SoftBank has not had a good track record lately, especially in transportation.
And that's one of the things here. SoftBank, it's now becoming something to when you see, oh, this is a company that SoftBank put money into, I'm going the other way.
Exactly. I'm like, oh boy.
Yeah. But so, and this is something we'll be talking about more in the future, but this is, just one piece of, a multimodal mobility ecosystem that, goes from micro mobility, scooters and bikes to, pods like this to mass transit, and everything in between. We need a lot of different solutions, so that you have the right vehicle for every trip, because there is no solution that is ideal for everything, for every trip, for every person.
Yeah. So we talked about, I think, the philosophy behind this. Was there any sort of like engineering things that stood out? I mean, you got two companies that are solid engineering powerhouses, GM and Honda. Putting this thing together, I'm assuming it's viable and not just.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, they were pretty light on specific details, but I did get some stuff from a variety of people I talked to this week. First of all, the EV platform that they're using for this thing is not based on the Bolt. It's actually GM's what they call their BEV3 platform. It's their new generation EV platform, which is going to be. So it means it's sharing components with, things like the upcoming Cadillac electric crossover that's coming, and various other EVs that are coming from GM in the next couple of years. They, in order to try to keep the cost of this vehicle manageable, they're staying away from exotic materials like carbon fiber and so on. It's got a basic steel unibody structure, but they claim that, the cost of this vehicle, even with the automated driving system, is going to, they didn't give a specific number, but they hinted that it would be about half the cost of a premium electric SUV. And the slide that they showed during the presentation, they had two Cruise Origins and a Tesla Model X. And, so that kind of implies that it's somewhere in the $45,000 to $50,000 price range. And when I talked to people afterwards, they said, yeah, that's about right, somewhere in that neighborhood. And by getting rid of things that you don't need from conventional vehicles, like the steering wheel and pedals and mirrors and windshield wipers and power seats and all this other stuff that we've been talking about today, that takes a lot of cost out of the thing, and keeping it a more simple, straightforward thing, and then making it modular so that you can easily service and replace these various components that over the life of the vehicle.
I think that's a very smart approach.
Mm-hmm.
I look forward to taking a ride on it and telling people what I think.
I hear it's going to show up somewhere this summer for some pilot programs, and I'm sure we'll start seeing these on the streets in San Francisco, sometime in the next several months. I
super duper can't wait to heckle the crap out of that in Boston traffic either.
Well, that is one of the challenges that AV developers have is dealing with hecklers.
Yeah,
with super duper
right?
hecklers.
Exactly. Well, that's Boston. Did we have any other topics that we wanted to cover? We got a little bit out of order, I think, with our topic list, but I think we covered everything.
Yeah, we did. Okay.
Wow.
Let me see. There's a couple other emails, but let's save those for next time.
Any praise? Any effusive praise? I'll take the effusive praise.
Yeah. So there was Chuck Goolsby.
Oh, Chuck. Chuck is a friend of ours.
He sent us his Hello World email, and he's just to let us know he's out there. And his current fleet includes an 07 BMW M Roadster, a 65 E-Type Jaguar,
still has the E-Type,
a 79 BMW 320i, and an 87 M6. Yeah, and he's had a bunch of other interesting vehicles over the years as well. So some of these he actually still has. He says these days he mostly drives a Kubota diesel tractor.
Does he drive the tractor, or does the tractor drive the tractor?
Sounds like he said he drives it. Okay, so we'll see.
I think there's a market for like retrofitting the autonomous driving onto tractors that can be repaired. Yeah.
Do you have a lot of caffeine today?
I had a little bit. I also think there's a market for, making screens that replace the giant touch screens in cars, and you have buttons and switches on them, and maybe a smaller screen.
Hey,
right?
Hey, I will say I was so excited today because I was able to both turn the radio on, adjust the volume, and change the station the very first time in the Jeep Wrangler, and I appreciate that.
That is excellent. Yeah, just wait until next year when they put like a 24-inch curved screen. Although I think the curved screens are actually going to be good.
Yeah, we'll be talking more about touchscreens next week.
All right, awesome.
Can't wait.
Well, until then, we'll catch everybody later.
All right, bye.
Cheers. Bye.
At Arizona State University, we're bringing world-class education from our globally acclaimed faculty to you. Ranked #1 in innovation for 10 consecutive years and #2 among public universities for employability, ASU isn't just ahead of the curve, it's creating new paths to success. Earn your degree from the nation's most innovative university. Online, that's a degree better. Explore more than 300 undergraduate, graduate, and certificate programs at asuonline.asu.edu.